fundamental issues which we need to tackle through the political class. And there I want to bring in that, unless we engage with the political class in this country on some of these issues, we are not going to get these amendments in place. Because human rights cannot be just fought on its own. There has to be some consensus in the political parties about the amendments to the PHRA Act. And coming back finally to Kandhamal, it was not just about Kandhamal's being lower calibration and priority. Compared to Karnataka attack on Christians got much higher visibility. Because there again a caste issue is at stake. Because the Christians who were attacked in Kandhamal, you and I know that they are Dalit Christians and tribal Christians, and who are really the poorest of the ladder. So even the I'm sorry to use that kind of language, but even BBC and CNN were not interested in looking at those attacks on Christians. They were quite happy at looking at the churches attacked in Bangalore and Mangalore. So there is this sense of discrimination when we look at it. Kandhamal is also very, very far away. I mean, I've been there 3 times. It's 18 hours from Bhubaneswar. Whereas Gujarat, different districts are very accessible by road. So there are these factors. TV cameras don't want to go there. They don't want to follow up the cases. But I think the fundamental failure all of us have failed in is to get this higher judiciary to monitor Kandhamal. I think we are all responsible for it. I don't think any particular person is responsible for it. Somehow we need to accentuate the fact that this kind of violence needs objective monitoring by the higher judiciary. Because even the Gujarat High Court failed at a certain point of time, just like the Orissa High Court has failed, the Kandhamal victims. Because a certain communal mindset comes under way. Only Supreme Court with whatever limited understanding came to the rescue. So I think these are some understandings that we need to kind of. And that's why, I wanted to end by talking about, at some point after the questions are over, talking about the Varun Gandhi case. Because it's not true that we are working only in Gujarat. We are working also in UP and other parts. The Varun Gandhi case is another important case, and also the communal violence bill. And where that has got stuck. And I know that some of the fundamental questions that Karamat are raising are important, but I think they're not important for this session alone. They're important for another session. Because we also need to tackle, as lawyers and activists, why we fail to intervene when certain violations take place. Whereas it's easier for us to intervene when certain other violations take place. There is a certain calibration in our responses. It's easier to respond. It's easier to have seminars and discussions on theoretical issues, but not take on the law. I mean, that is my accusation as an activist, as if this thing, that it's much easier to have theoretical discussions on discrimination, but not actually fight for one conclusion of one trial in a successful manner. Why? Because it is only through that struggle that you're going to actually gain strategies to understand how to actually tackle the theoretical base, not by simply theorizing.
Any other question or comment?
What's the constitutional position in India on the Dalits' rights, untouchables, and other religious minorities? What are the constitutional positions? The one point. The second is, if there are intermarriages, intertwine each other with religious minorities, then what's the position of civil society or public litigation on this?
Very good question. See, there are 2-3 things. One is that you have a constitutional framework that has in the fundamental rights section, like I mentioned to Article 1421, you have in the fundamental rights section basic premises of equality and non-discrimination. Those basic premises are in place. But Karamat is right when he says that though we have abolished untouchability in the constitution, we have not abolished caste. So the fundamental societal division that has resulted in untouchability, we didn't want to touch. There was a lot of debate on it, but untouchability is abolished. So that remains an anomaly. That remains a great contradiction, without question. Similarly, like I mentioned to you earlier when I spoke about the socio-economic denials of the religious minorities, that I've already mentioned, so I won't go into now. Now coming to your question about so you had this constitutional equality non-discrimination framework, okay? Now fundamental rights means that if I am a Dalit or if I am a Muslim or a person who's discriminated against, I should be able to go to court. There's a justiciability in fundamental rights abuse, right? So you can invoke Article 226 and go to the High Court, or Article 32 and go to the Supreme Court. However, Indian legislation, political class, Indian society found that despite this constitutional framework, Dalits remain discriminated against at very basic levels. In terms of violence, in terms of segregation, in terms of denial of admission to schools, a variety of things. So therefore, in 1955, we legislated a Civil Rights Protection Act, which was to protect the rights of Dalits and Adivasis. We found in 1983, 81, 82, 83, that act is ineffective. So then we enact in 1989 an SC/ST Prevention of Atrocities Act. Okay, now you have to understand this. So we have a constitutional framework which guarantees very, very fine things. But yet you have a society which is stratified and discriminating on caste and on community. Okay? So therefore you have special legislation coming in 1955, revised in 1989, which is now known as the atrocities. Last year, I think 2009, was 20 years of the Atrocities Act. And Dalit groups across the country have done very good job of analyzing how this act has failed. And now they are asking for amendments in that law. Okay? What are the amendments they are asking for is that, many issues. What is the government? See, if you enact a special law for a certain section, like the Dalits or the Adivasis, and you are saying that if violence occurs against Dalits, then this law will come into place, not your CRPC and IPC. So what does the police do? They invoke CRPC, IPC, but they don't invoke that law. So there were a lot of problems with that. So implementation has been a huge problem in India always. So now they are asking for amendments which are likely to be passed in the next session of Parliament. So that is just the law. Forget the implementation of it. Then is your question of intercaste marriages. On paper, Ambedkar always said that the only way to get rid of caste is to encourage intercaste marriages. I personally believe that the only way to have a secular, without caste society is to encourage intercommunity marriages and intercaste marriages. That's my personal position. Legally, there's nothing to prevent. Legally, you have every right, if you're a major, to marry across the caste barrier, across the community barrier. You have in India different personal laws in place. You have the Hindu personal law, Muslim personal law, Christian personal law. You also have something called the Special Marriages Act. For instance, I've married under the Special Marriages because we did not want to marry through any religious this thing. So you marry through the Special Marriages Act, which is basically a registry in court. Okay, it's a registry in court. Now, ironically, this whole majority-minority debate, two aspects which I wanted to bring in at the end, which I'll bring in now because it's relevant to your question. That this entire personal law debate has also become very communalized, as you might be knowing, ever since the Shah Banu judgment. Because unfortunately, this very patriarchal Muslim clergy reacted to 125 rupees being paid to one poor widow. And in a very stupid display of identity, instead of talking about the issue of protection of your personal law, it appeared as if they were against 125 rupees being paid in 1986. So, a special law was passed. The Muslim Women Divorce and Protection Act was passed by Parliament to exclude Muslim women from this. It created a wide debate, lot of polarization, etc. But as of now, what people don't realize is that under the Special Marriages Act, which is 1976 Act, if you are a Hindu, born from the majority community, you have certain benefits which a minority community marrying under this act will not have. Because an amendment was brought in 1976. If you are married under this act, you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Sikh or a Jew, you cannot retain the right to inheritance under your personal law, whereas a Hindu partner can. So within the law, there are certain privileges given to the Hindu citizen. In terms of personal law, there's an income tax law which benefits the Hindu undivided family. Now, there are Bombay High Court judgments which say, and they give you tax benefit. They say that even a single male heir can be called a Hindu joint family. Now, the Hindu joint family provision was meant for when the assets used to be in one place. Now, that is being misused by big business houses, upper caste Hindus, and judges from the same class and caste are ruling in their favor. So that's a completely majoritarian framework within the law, which is not debated enough. So when this personal law debate was going on, and as a feminist, I believe that women in India should have the option of a common civil code. I don't believe in uniform, because there's nothing like a uniform civil code. Uniform means majoritarian. But if I believe it should be a gender-just civil code, I think it should include the Islamic principle of not disenfranchising your first wife. That's a very good part of Islamic personal law, that actually that if you marry again, you can't disenfranchise your personal first wife and children from property. Which Hindu male will accept that? So, the debate needs to be calibrated, it needs to be complex, and it needs to be non-sectarian. Today, that debate is only led by the BJP in its aggressive mode, and there's nobody with a proper, robust, secular vision who's debating that. So the whole question of majoritarian bent in Indian laws needs to be looked at not just from the personal law point of view, but from other benefits. And finally, just like the Dalits are asking now for more teeth to the Atrocities Act, many of us who are working on minority rights are asking for a special law to prevent and targeted and communal violence against religious minorities. That draft is in place, government is working on the draft, but government is dragging its feet. So 66 years after independence, despite having a constitution, if you need a special law to protect the lives of minorities, it shows that you've not really been successful in secularizing society and in creating a temper of non-discrimination. I don't know if I've answered you.
If there are no more questions, maybe Lisa will then conclude the remaining part of the presentation.
No, but there might, I think there were one or two more questions. I'm not sure.
I just want to ask.
Sure.
Go, Mike.
Ma'am, you mentioned state X always a prosecutor. State X always a prosecutor.
I'm saying that under our system of jurisprudence, the state is the prosecutor of crimes, yeah.
Do you think there is any other alternative?
In our system, see, that's what I'm saying, that requires a fundamental debate. In the adversarial, we have a certain kind of jurisprudence. Whether it's India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, we have this form of jurisprudence. In Europe, you have a different form, where the judiciary itself can also be interlocutor, and there's an adversarial form of jurisprudence. That requires some fundamental issues, but the whole system will then have to be turned around, So that needs a kind of very robust discussion and argument. Because we have actually built, all our countries from this region have built our jurisprudence of a certain kind. But I think we must insist on victims' rights and citizens' rights within this system, at least to begin with. Which is why we talked about this amendment that I was talking about, which we are using successfully.
One of the problems we are having in Sri Lanka at the moment is with witness protection.